I don't know how this works anyway. I thought it was on and there it is. You can see it, right?
Yes.
All right, if I have to show it, but I have all this equipment, it's terrible. Anyway, we're going to be talking about the southern half of Africa and skipping the European settlements, which Daniel has talked about and has covered and knows more about than I do. So the southern half of Africa is really dominated by Bantu people. And where do the Bantu come from? That's a little bit of a mystery. All we know is that there's an original Bantu homeland right around there. This Nok civilization is an ancient civilization, and it probably dates back to maybe even 40,000 years ago. For sure it dates back to 20,000 years ago. So we don't know if it's related exactly to the Bantus. There's a problem with research, with archaeological research in this whole area and in the continent as well, in sub-Saharan Africa, and I'm going to be talking about that in another talk when I talk about the archaeological sites of the Northwest. But the Bantus, sometime around 12,000 years ago, they developed, or they appeared in this area as a separate language group, and then they started to spread out. We don't know why they spread out, but we have a few theories about that. This is kind of the date. They split into two groups, the Eastern and the Western group. The Eastern group continued to migrate downward, and this is the Ngoni people that the Zulus are part of, that are in South Africa. They're the latest to arrive down here. And then another group went down the western side of Africa and settled along all the way down to Namibia, including Namibia. Those are the Herero, the people that you saw yesterday performing. There are two groups of them. They are probably Bantus as well. They skipped pretty much the central area, which is the Congo Basin, the river basin right here, and that is the jungle. And I'm going to talk about the jungle. There are two areas where the Bantus skipped. One is that jungle area, and the other is the area of the Kalahari Desert. And the Kalahari Desert is very important to us because those are the closest descendants of our human descendants. Now, the thought is that the Bantu migration started because they discovered iron smelting, and they could make agricultural implements. Agriculture had already been established in the Sahelian area with millet and sorghum, but it wasn't very efficient, and the Bantus, when they learned to smelt iron, they started to make agricultural implements, and agriculture became more efficient. And that seems to have caused a growth in population. When you have more food, you have more population growth, and soil exhaustion, which spurred people to move out of that area and to seek new lands. But of course, what happens with agriculture? When you get agriculture, the nomadic way of life stops. People settle down because they now invest in land. And when they look at the working hours and the amount of human effort that is involved in agricultural villages compared to nomadic hunters and gatherers, the hunters and gatherers have an easier life. And we will look at some of the things that they do and how the two types of lifestyles compare. They had previously taken the adaptation of millet and sorghum and started to apply those principles of selection, of seed selection and food selection to the plants and to local plants. And that is what they grew in their area, in the Bantu area, as they started moving forward. They skipped 2 areas, and this is on the Ubangi River. There is a group of people that are not related to the Bantus, but interact with the Bantus, and we used to call them pygmies. That is not the politically correct term. They have different names, and the ones that I met with and got to know are they call themselves the Baka. And then, of course, we have the Kalahari Desert, which are also people who are not Bantus, but intermarry and intermix with the Bantus. So I'm going to make a little diversion and talk about the Baka, and then return to the Bantu migration. They formerly called pygmies, some of them, they're scattered throughout the Congo Basin. They are basically tropical forest people adapted to the tropical forest. Some of the groups are unrelated to each other. We don't know what their original origin is, but they have all developed a very similar type of lifestyle because of the environment and the efficient way in which they use their environment. They are simple people, and they hunt and they gather and they interact with the agricultural people. They trade their hunting goods. They will hunt and bring animal skins and animal meat to the villages with whom they trade, and in return they get grain, and they will take the grain back to their villages. This is the Baka village in Cameroon that I visited a number of times and spent a number of days with them. They live very simply. They're very gentle people with a very ordinary, basic lifestyle. All they're doing is living from day to day, enjoying their lives, hunting, singing, getting together, playing with their children. To get to the Baka south of Kribi in Cameroon, we had to take a boat, and we got to these people that were pre-arranged. The visit was pre-arranged each time. I went there a number of times over a period of several years, so you will see this is the chief and his son, and they look alike, and you'll see that in the pictures they look a little bit different because they age as we age, as I age. They made an arrangement with the visitors to get rice and cooking pots and a few other things. These are people who have moved out of the Congo forests and the tropical forests, and they have come to the edge of the town of Kribi in the Cameroon partly because of the warfare and partly because the disruption, ecological disruption that's taking place, and they felt that life would be better. These are the Baka. Now, when we came, they dressed up. They do not dress up like this when they're normally on their own. In fact, I don't know what they wear. I never saw them in their original clothing, but I have a feeling they wear very little. And they loincloths are probably what they wear. This was something that they put on a show for us, and they played drums, and they showed us some of their cultural activity, a dance. As you can see, it is not terribly sophisticated. It is very based on rhythm, and their costumes are made out of local materials. They have a very simple and straightforward culture, and they simply live from day to day. That's their whole cultural base. They have no literacy. They had a school. We brought school supplies to them. They are not a literate people. They were supposed to be learning French in the school, but every year that we came, the school was in exactly the same condition, without a roof, without desks, without chairs, without tables. It was just a frame, and that was it. So that is one of the forest groups, and eventually they'll disappear back into the forest, and another group will come over to the city area for a period of time. As we go into the Congo itself, and I can't talk very much about the Congo because it is constantly in upheaval, political upheaval and economic upheaval, but it is basically a conscription society where people are either escaping conscription or being conscripted into the mines, and there's a lot of informal mining. The Congo itself was destabilized by King Leopold II, and ever since then it has never regained its cultural and political stability. So it is an area that is very little known and constantly in flux and still based very heavily on mining. And this is going to continue because of the minerals that are being extracted there that are wanted and required by Western technology. There are UN peacekeepers. It is an it's an active war zone. We can't go into the Congo, and this is Kinshasa, Congo, where there are UN peacekeepers constantly in the area, in the whole country. The country is very rich. Congo is probably the richest country in the world in terms of resources and in terms of potential. But it is a country in total upheaval still under very repressive regimes and warfare. And its riches are in these minerals, which you can see the diamonds are the diamond shape. I'm not getting, oh well. The diamonds are where the diamond mines, and where you have the gold color, the yellow is resources in gold. This pink over here, the pink square called coltan, I don't know what the mineral coltan is, but it's used in cell phones and it's used in car batteries that are in electric cars. So all of this is spread out through, and you know, Leopold of Belgium knew that the Congo was potentially very rich, which is why he took it for himself. And these are some of the minerals that today are almost more valuable than gold, and they are because we need them for our technology. Here's the cobalt, and even though this slide says 70% of the world's cobalt is in the batteries, it's now up to 90% comes from the Congo itself. And of course, with such riches, everybody is fighting over it. If a little bit to the south, now if you see Congo, you know, I'm not getting, this is on, but it's not, there it is, it's weak. The screen is got a reflection on it, and so laser pointers don't always work on the screen itself. But if you look at the area between the DR Congo and the country to the south, which is Angola, which is a former Portuguese colony, this area in the north was the Kingdom of the Congo. And this kingdom straddled both countries. It was a very centralized kingdom, and it has been pretty much decimated by the warfare that has gone on here for the last 50 years, or basically since independence. If we look at the warfare that's gone on in Angola, and we see that they have had, since 1961, they have had pretty much constant warfare until 2002. They are going through a period of peace right now, but the peace is a peace within poverty, and we'll look at that in a moment. But if you look, these are Bantu groups that had come down and settled maybe 5,000 years ago, maybe 3,000 years ago. It's very difficult to date these groups. They date them by the iron implements that they make, the styles, and by the iron itself. And if you'll see, these are different sub-language groups. There are over 500 Bantu languages that have been identified. And these are the ones pretty much in Angola. Angola also, at the time of contact with the Europeans, was a kingdom, a series of kingdoms, and as all kingdoms, the borders were contested. And Angola actually had a queen, Queen Nzinga. Now this is the interesting thing about all the Bantus. The Bantus tend to be matrilineal. And in some ways, they tend to be at times matrilocal, which means after marriage, a man goes to live with his wife's clan. And they also are, they also have bride price, which I will explain in a short time. But in Angola, at the time of contact, when the Portuguese first came here after 1500, they were confronted with Queen Nzinga's army and with her kingdom. And this is a woodcut showing the first contact between the Portuguese and Queen Nzinga. And the Portuguese, in order to humiliate the locals, they would have the locals stand in front of them, and they would sit, the captain of the ship or the local governor or the local dignitary was sitting, and the locals were supposed to stand. Well, Queen Nzinga quickly saw what was going on, and she signaled to her servant, her servant got down on all fours and she sat down in front of him. And that established her immediately as equal to the Portuguese. She learned the Portuguese language eventually and was Christianized, took a Portuguese name, and she actually made a deal, a treaty with the Portuguese, where she would retain her kingdom and her independence. She would also get guns, and she would provide the Portuguese with slaves if they supported her kingdom's integrity. And they did, and her kingdom survived for a number of years, and she is honored with a statue, and she is a UNESCO historical figure inscribed in the UNESCO Hall of Fame. Angola is still emerging from years of war. The wars that were fought over diamonds. And if you ever see the documentary Blood Diamonds, that is the story of Angola. It was a three-way war. There was the Soviet Union, there was the US, and there was South Africa. And all three wanted a piece of Angola. Angola had to make the decision of where they were going to align themselves, and obviously different groups aligned themselves to the different countries, so the war ended up as a three-way war that was waged in the jungles and caused tremendous uprooting of the population. When it was all over, the MPLA, the communist-leaning side, had won, and Eduardo dos Santos was elected the president of Angola and retained that position for 38 years. He just recently stepped down. He is incredibly wealthy. I was there during when there was an election. He is incredibly wealthy, and it is because of the oil in the little enclave that is to the north on the coast called Cabinda, and it is run by Esso. And they provide kickbacks to Eduardo dos Santos, who in Africa it is called gatekeepers. And there's a book written about how this system works. The average income that people live on is $2.50 US a day. Dos Santos obviously doesn't live on that amount. About 45% of Angolans live in these shanty towns. They're called museques. Angola is a Portuguese-speaking country. These are called museques, and they are informal settlements that people who have escaped the fighting in the jungles and in the countryside have come to the cities to live and seek peace. There have been several studies, mostly done by the Danish and sponsored by the UN, about what life is like in the museques. And as you can see from the budgeting for the state, only 1% of the total national budget goes to education. So a lot of the people in the country of Angola are illiterate. 1 out of 5 children die before their 5th birthday. The infant mortality rate is incredibly high. In the museques, the women run things because they are able to go out and do the marketing. The men are generally unemployed, and some of them are semi-trained, but they have nothing, they have no jobs. The women get together and form cooperatives. The cooperatives then lend money to a woman to buy something that they might sell. It could be children's clothes, it could be fish, it could be bananas. And then the women go to the market, and then they repay the loan, and they live off of that income. And Angola, like most of the countries in southern Africa, in fact, most of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa, are what I would call container cultures. This is the port of Luanda, and what it is that nothing really is produced in sub-Saharan Africa. And the reason is because it has always been dissuaded. Development has been, the European countries have dissuaded and not wanted development of Africa. They had wanted the raw materials, the gold, the diamonds, and the minerals, but they never invested in the development of African internal, either the agriculture or any kind of industrialization. So you have this container culture that has developed around imports. And this is Luanda. When I was there last, this is from the government hill, they were developing the Malecon, the area around the port. Luanda is different from many other African cities, especially on the Atlantic, because it was settled by Portuguese, by Europeans. Most Western African cities were not settled. They were only received government officials and military. A few got some settlers, and Luanda is one of the areas that got settlers. It maintains a very close relationship with Brazil, and it is specifically because of these shanty towns and musekis that its relationship with Brazil is kept very active, and that is through religion, and it's through evangelical religions. Because when I was here in, I can't remember if it was, I think it was 2011, the Pope was here as well. And what he did, I don't know if it was Benedict or which Pope it was, but he was visiting Luanda at the same time when we were there, and it was in all the papers, and he wanted the land back that had been taken over by the shanty towns from the church. And he had bulldozed several of the musekis, displacing 29,000 people who were living in these shanty towns. And they expect to be displaced. They don't expect to be permanently there, but they expect their things that they own to be theirs and to be given back to them and reimbursed. They've put in water. They've put in flush toilets. They've put in schools of their own. These are people who have organized themselves. And what happened was that the Pope, together with Eduardo dos Santos, bulldozed one of the great musekis, the large musekis. This did not sit well. And of course, what happened was the Brazilians came in with aid. And they came in with aid and evangelical religion that organized people and helped them survive through this transition period. So the Catholic Church actually lost a lot of converts, and the Brazilian evangelical church gained in status because of that. Eduardo dos Santos has a daughter by his Russian first wife, She was a Soviet when he was in his Soviet period. Isabel dos Santos is the richest woman in Africa. And she is right now in Portugal, and all her assets, several $billion, have been frozen by the Portuguese government because the Portuguese government has taken her to court for theft. They say she stole the people's money. And this is still an ongoing situation. Now, the later migration was down the east of the east coast of southern Africa, but it skipped the central area of Africa because of the desert. And this desert is very interesting. It's called the Kalahari Desert, and it is settled by a people called the Khoisan. Khoisan is actually two words combined, the Khoi and the San, and they were two different people that have eventually united, and we're not sure at what time and what period they were united. But the interesting thing is that these people are the genetically ancestral human lineage. They have, and this is where I won't go into the genetics of it, but it's the journey of man. If you ever saw the NPR documentary, The Journey of Man, it is about the San. And it was done, these genetic studies were done in Stanford University by Cavalli Sforza, and they're called The Journey of Man. And through this genetic study, he and his co-workers determined that the San, who are today the inhabitants of the Kalahari Desert, are the direct ancestral lineage related to our original humans. And we're going to talk a little bit about human evolution, but from a physical anthropology point of view in the future. The San are not related to Bantus, and they're not related to other Africans. And they do not have Asian genes. Those Asian genes apparently appear later after humans leave Africa. And they have a very specific form of adaptation. They are hunters and gatherers. They live in the Kalahari Desert and have learned to utilize the resources of the desert and to do hunting, but they use poisons, natural poisons, for hunting big game, that giraffe. And there's a movie called The Gods Must Be Crazy. I don't know if you've ever seen that. And it is about the San. And some of these photographs, these pictures actually come from those movies. They are a gentle, kind people, and they were heavily, heavily persecuted by the Europeans who moved into southern Africa and wanted to enslave them. It was very hard to enslave them. It's very hard to enslave nomadic people. They just simply disappear into the desert and they go elsewhere, but their numbers are dwindling because their ecological area for hunting has diminished, has shrunk. They go back 40, 50, maybe 60,000 years. And in southern Africa, in Drakensberg, there are these cave drawings that are associated with San culture and have been dated to 60,000 years ago. And there's very little actually known about these people because they leave nothing but footprints where they go. They have no architecture and they have very little in the way of material culture. This is, I think this is one from the Gods Must Be Crazy from the movie, where they're posed and they don't work hard. And there have been studies done that show that nomadic people and hunters and gatherers are people who are living a life of leisure. They have very few wants, and they consider themselves the richest people on earth because they define wealth as the difference between what you want and what you have. And if you have everything you want, you are rich. And they feel they are rich. They have a rich culture. And in the 50s, there was a movement in the anthropological world and in the natural history to go and study the San, not because at that time we knew that they were a direct line to our ancestors, but because it was thought that all human cultures pass through a hunter-gatherer phase like the San, and they were studying the San in order to try to get to human cultural evolutionary history. And this was one family in particular, John Marshall and his wife and 2 children, went to live among the San. When I started graduate school, they were living and photographing the San. And the interesting thing is, this man standing on the left side of the picture is Robert Dyson. And he was the head of our museum at the University of Pennsylvania when I was in school there. And he also was the head of our Tikal project in 1961, which is before I got to the project. And he did not like working in the tropics.